Hi, Vincent Hall, and welcome to another episode of Anyone Can Draw, Paint, and Create. If you're watching this on Wednesday, November 11th, when it's aired through the Vincent Hall TV station, you'll know that today is Veterans Day. So I thought it would be a good idea to incorporate some aspect of Veterans Day, or Armistice Day as it originally was known, by using the American flag as our conduit for a drawing. Now, you can take the flag and incorporate it into a cityscape, maybe a flag hanging off of a building or on a flagpole, or maybe a flag decorating some other aspect of the environment. But I'm going to look at the flag in two ways. First, out of respect for our veterans and the fact that it is Veterans Day, as a symbol of our freedom in the United States, and then also as fabric that has folds and has stripes. Because when something is striped and folded, as you can see when we're drawing it, say a flag billowing in the wind or something, you're going to see that those stripes change direction. And by following that change in direction, we're going to be able to learn how to draw any material that has some kind of pattern or design by watching what really happens. Because when things fold, as you can see, the stripes change their direction. So where it was red, now it's white, and the red and white interchange because they're in a fold. That's key, because when you're drawing something that has a pattern on material or somebody is wearing, it's going to move or change depending on how that material drapes. Very similar to when we were drawing something that was reflecting in glass. If you recall, when something goes through glass and there's water in the glass, even a straw, it's going to shift when it goes into the water. So you don't see that line of the straw or the plant stem straight down. Same with stripes. They're going to shift depending on the role of the material. Now, in order to not be disrespectful and lay a flag down on a surface or on the ground, I'm using a photograph of a flag on my computer that I will share with you before I start drawing the project, so that you'll be able to see exactly what I'm using as visual reference. I'm going to be using gray paper so that I can use color pencil, and since the flag is red, white, and blue, I want to use my white colored pencil and the shadings of white to show those white stripes. So let's get started. As you can see, and as promised, you'll see how the stripes, as they bend over this fold, which we can see here best on the white, they change direction and you'll see a staggered edge. When you're drawing something with stripes or any other kind of pattern, it's key to know that where something folds, just like a road going over a hill, there's going to be a shift where our eyes can no longer see what's happening, right here, for example. Also notice how the stars distort. They might elongate. You might only see a part of the star. Here they're kind of bending down because, again, they're on blue material, but they are also in a wave and a fold and going to be distorted as well. I also wanted you to pay attention to the fact that even though this is white, we see blues in here, which this artist had shown through paint were shadows. I'm going to be using more of a bluish gray, not that bright blue there, to show the shadows. But again, color mixing using green and red to make these dark reds are going to be key for getting our nice rich tones on the flag. Since I'm doing a full format drawing of this flag, I went ahead and masking taped out my paper, which we've done before, to create a format that I can draw within the size of this paper. Oftentimes our paper is going to be bigger than what we want our actual drawing to be. So creating a format with masking tape is a quick solution to really making sure you know where you're going within the confines of the space of your paper. But now it's time to focus on our drawing. I'm going to start drawing with a white pencil since I have a toned surface. Now, if you're going to do this on white paper, that's fine. Just don't use a white pencil because you won't see where you're going. And I am just looking at the basic shape of where that blue is in relationship to the rest of the flag. And then I'm going to just start drawing in where I see the flag bend And then I'm drawing, there's a line that comes down, a pretty straight fold right here. By drawing that line in, I know where I'm going next on my stripes. And the key is where I see the stripe right here, I'm going to shift down and draw over. And if it bends, I'm bending. The key is for this, draw what you actually see, not what you know. That, if there's one lesson I've learned in drawing, it's that those two things are not necessarily at all the same. So what I think I see is that this line would go all the way down, but it doesn't. It's a much softer drape here. And this flag just sort of tapers off here down to the bottom. And then this part has a bigger dip. Then it comes up and then down again. So I can see right here, I already drew what I thought I saw rather than what I really saw. So it happens to everyone. And then I'm just drawing where I see this fold. And then I'm coming up here. And then there's an interesting subfold right here as the flag kind of tapers off the bottom. Now, proportionally, you may or may not have the exact same proportions of paper that you would be drawing from, and that's fine too. We can always adjust. So here's the basic idea in white. Probably a little hard to see, but we're just doing the outlines. Now it's time to really lay in the color. I'm going to start with red because it's the easiest to see. And it's the first one when we talk about red, white, and blue. Well, red comes first. So we're going to start with red on this drawing as well. If it goes up to the top and you are using masking tape as your overlay, just be careful not to get caught too far up into the masking tape like I just did there. And we're just going to lay in one surface of colored pencil. Now, doing this flag in colored pencil means that you're going to have to press a little heavier than you probably feel comfortable with, or at the very least, go back over it and do a couple of passes. I have a very rough textured paper. This paper, as you recall, is called bogus paper, which I always thought was funny because it sounds like not real paper. If something is bogus, it's usually not fact, but they call it bogus gray. I'm not sure why, but they do. I'm going to keep going with my red while I have it. So in this case, it's all right to do all one color at a time. Normally we blend things, but again, I'm just trying to block in. So I'm going to keep going here with my red and just get the basic idea of where all the red is. And I will be back with finished red and we'll look at where we're going with white. White and red are laid in. So we're going to do the next part, which is the blue. However, this is where I have my stars. So I'm going to not think about stars at all, because if I do, I'm not going to get the shape of these stars because these stars are very distorted and elongated as they go through the fold. For example, that one is completely cut off. Then we have a little piece of a star here. You can see the very edge of it there. This is a fold coming down along the edge of the flag. Then up here, we have this. I'm going to stop referring to it as stars. I'm going to talk about angled lines, and that's what we're going to be drawing in as we see what we're looking at on this fold. Like I said, it's super distorted because it's going down along a fold. So some of these stars are going to be much closer together than they would be if you were looking at them on a flag that was completely straightened out or flying completely in a breeze so that you can see all of the stars equally. Then we have another fold here, and I'm just roughing it in. And now this star comes across. And we'll compare this to the original here when we're done. But this one is probably most likely to be seen by the general public as an actual star. It's closer than the others. This one becomes thinner. These two points almost touch. Maybe just think of it as triangles. And that might help a little bit too. Now, not all these stars are going to be white either, because as they get caught up in the whole scheme of the flag being blown around here, they are going to change direction and they're going to change color. So if they're in a shadow, they're interpreted more as a bluish white or a gray rather than white. So now that I have my stars, and I drew those in with blue instead of white so that I can go around it, because they are white, but they're on a blue background. And this way, by coloring in their background, I'm able to maintain the integrity of those folds and not have to worry about some white halo around my stars. Or if you're doing material for some other kind of a project that has pattern in it, whatever it might be, draw whatever the background color is to draw the outline of the object. So let's say you had yellow flowers on a green background. Draw the outline of the flowers in green. That way, when you're doing the background, you don't have to worry about having that halo effect. Or in photography, we like to call it now in digital photography, the JPEG artifact. That pesky color that shows up when you're trying to outline something from somewhere else and the background color starts showing through. Okay, so now we have things that don't quite look like stars but are going to represent stars once they're white, and the basic colors that I'm going to use. It's time to start with the blending. So I've selected my pencils, and I do have some different tones of reds, and I have my green, which is going to make our darkest red, as well as some different tones of blue, which I'm going to blend with a black to make the gray for my white that has shading. Let's see how this all works. What I'm going to do first is get my reds figured out, because I have a lot of red here that has highlights. So I want to make sure I get all of that. And that involves really darkening in this red by going a different direction than the way I went the first time. Now, we all know I'm a fan of wetting the colored pencil, and I am going to go ahead and do that most likely when I'm done with this, because this paper is great for drawing on, but it really does have quite a distinct tooth. A tooth in paper, by the way, is the texture or the roughness of it. So if you're using computer paper at home, you have a very smooth tooth on that. Say that one 3 times fast, smooth tooth. And you won't have any problems with this blending because you won't have any bumps on the paper. Then what I'm going to do is take my darker red and start defining where I see the shadows. Now I am also going to use green where it's really dark, but I'm starting with this just so I can lay in where I want to go with that green later on. So I'm going in with a darker red. If you don't have a darker red, do not worry. Just skip this step and wait for me to come back in a minute here with the green, which is where I'm going to be momentarily here. And I'm just roughing in where I see shadows. And again, draw what you see, not what you know. Things change. So there's a shadow only going along the bottom here, but then it gets bigger as it comes up towards the end of this flag here. And this is what's really going to give our drawing some depth, because otherwise it would look really flat, even if the lines were following the correct direction. And this is a bump in the white where this white is going to be really bright. And for those of you in my painting and drawing classes, you've often heard me say the darkest shadow follows the highest highlight. So where we have a highlight, which is going to be really bright white up here, our dark shadow or our darker red is going to come into play underneath it. And then there's a little bit of red right here, which I didn't even see the first time. So again, I am guilty of drawing what I know, not what I see in that regard, because I should have noticed I had a little more red than what I actually used. Okay, so that's basically it for the reds. Now I'm taking my green, yes, green, because green is a complement of red, and going back over this. I'm going to go back over the green a second time with some red so it really blends. But using the complementary colors will give you the depth without it being black and then being flat. So always try to shade using complementary colors And in this case, we're using red, so the complement of red is green, and I'm just going everywhere that I laid in my darker red, or if you only have one red, where you pressed harder on the red, so that I have a value that I can build on. And then this one, this part here is probably the most dark of the entire picture. And I'm going around different directions. Then it's really dark right here, but just in a point. And if you go over your masking tape, if you're using masking tape and you don't have to, then that's not a problem either. We're just trying to, again, use that so that we have some way to see where our shadows go. Okay, so I think you got the idea of where our reds are going to have the shadows. I'm going to do the same thing with the blue, and I'm going to use a darker pencil for the blue. Let's see, where's my darkest blue? Here it is, blue indigo. Can't get much darker than that. And I'm simply following where I see the folds in this blue. And notice I did not color the stars in yet. So if I want to make any revisions on those by coloring in, for example, here, I see I missed the angle of the star a bit. And there's dark coming up through here. There's dark under here, then it gets lighter. And then there's dark down here. By adding these dark blues in, the distortions of the stars that we drew will start to make more sense. And here, I notice that I need to come down way further. So I can just go right over that blue because I'm going to go back over it with the other blue later. And bring this in, and then there's a little bit of dark right through here. And another dark here. There's a decent amount of dark blues on this, interestingly enough. There's lighter blue on the top. So it looks a little stripy right now, but we're going to correct some of that later. I do, however, want to color my lighter blue in here since I had missed that. And actually go over some of these dark blues with the original blue. This is more of a cerulean blue to kind of blend it in together. And there's also a little bit of blue that supersedes this and comes into this part of the flag here, which did not get colored in the first time. So we're just gonna go around that. Okay, last thing, jumping pencils. We're going to just take the white and color in all the stars white to start. Then you can go back and add the shading because not all of these stars are going to stay bright white. But like the rest of the flag, everything has to have a starting point. So we need to color them in white to begin with, and then we can change it around. This is a really good exercise in learning to draw what you see, because it's going to drive you crazy at first. You're going to be like, hold on a minute. Stars do not look like that. Like I learned how to draw stars. I did that. We all did those little up, downs. And this isn't it. No, but drawing from observation is all about drawing what you see and overriding that left side of your brain that just wants you to draw what you know. So please, please give it a chance. It can work. Like right here, there's just a little bit of a line. It's just a symbol of a star, but it's there. There we go in there. Now I noticed here that there's a little piece of white. I'm just going to erase out some of my blue so I can get white in here without compromising the white and making it look blue. But there's really just like a weird little shape here. It doesn't much look like a star, because it's just a piece of a star. But that's what's going to give the illusion of this cloth folding back up. And interestingly, this blue, at least the way the artist that did this painting did, blended it into the red a little bit. So there is a bit of a purpley tone there almost as well. What do we do with the white? Well, if you have a regular graphite pencil, you can use that, or you can use a black color pencil, which is what I'm using, to just lightly go where I see the shadows. This will blend into a gray once I add more white over it. but I'm just gonna kind of lightly go down where I see my shadows in the white and blend this in a little bit. It's going to look really splotchy at this point of the drawing if you're following along with my drawing, but don't worry about that because it's all going to change in a relatively short amount of time. But in order to show where the shadows are, we have to block those in first. That way the highlights will make more sense. And you can see I have no problem coloring over and into my little areas here of the tape. That's not a problem. Also, when you're looking at shadows, don't be afraid to draw exactly the shape of them. Now, I'm not drawing an outline of my shadows. I'm just doing a quick pass with my colored pencil instead. But here's where I have a really nice, really interesting shadow here where the white comes up and around. Kind of comes down in here, then there's one here, and then it comes down this way. So I did draw a little bit of a line in there, but I'm going to soften that out. Then, just to unify this a little bit, I am going to take my blue pencil. Actually, I'm going to do one more quick darker area right there. There we go. Sorry. Now I'm going to take my blue pencil and just go back over some of these, just to maintain the integrity of what my subject matter looks like that I am looking like. Because again, we're still working on drawing from observation. So if we're observing something where people had previously used blue to help give the symbol of a tone of white, then by all means, do what they did and use the blue. You can see it doesn't read blue, blue, if that's even a term. I like to make up terms, as anyone in the Art Center knows. So here we are with the blue, blue, which is, this is more of a neutral. It's not as bright as the flag up here. And while I'm here, I'm just gonna lay in a little more color because I feel like that's a little sparse. There we go. Now, what's going to make this whole thing pop is really pressing down on our whites. So I'm going to go in, I'll do one sample here, and then I'll come back and show you the finished project dry before we go back in and add some water to help give this thing some oomph, and that is a word. So I'm following along where I need to see my whitest whites, and right here is a big highlight. And right here is a big highlight. And then along here, notice I'm talking to myself, and that's okay because that's part of the beauty of this drawing. So where these edges are, I'm pressing the hardest. You don't have to press hard the whole way down. And then this is this big bump of a highlight. And I see that it comes down here and tapers. Then it comes along here. And here's this really interesting dip that I was talking about in the flag folds. It almost looks like it doesn't make sense, but it does. I drew in that other little highlight. One goes here. And then coming down here. Then the last of the bright highlights. It's almost like drawing in mountains. So if you remember from our exercises and drawings on landscapes, this is very similar. And where things fan out, I'm going to need to go sharpen my white colored pencil before we come back. But the last thing is going to be coloring this all in and blending it together. So I'm going to finish that with the white and I'll be right back. You can see that I have some of my highlights for my red, but I don't want to use white because if I use white over red, I'm going to get pink and the flag isn't pink. So what a lot of painters do as a trick for lightening red without using pink is to go in with an orange, believe it or not, because when it's blended with the red, it's going to give the illusion of a lighter, brighter, more vivid red because we already have red over it. Now, if I used orange by itself, I would have the orange, white, and blue flag, and that is not what we want. But by using it over the areas that were already red, and then I'm gonna go back over this orange with some more red, it'll just give enough of a nuance of the highlights and the shadows so that I won't have to worry about it. It's a subtle change, but it's one that's necessary. So going back over all that with a little bit of red. I just wanted to show you that before we finish this part and then move on to the actual using of water and a brush to kind of really make this color pencil pop. And whether you're using Barrel Colors or Derwent or whatever brand it is that you happen to like, the water will work for most of them, if not all. There's probably a brand out there that it won't, but most of them will work to get a nice blend. And then right here, where I see a couple of white areas coming in, I'm just taking that white again and using it as a blender. Now, I'm using Derwent color pencils for this, but the Barrel pencils work beautifully. The white will blend any neutrals, and you don't have to use water then if you don't want to. And the key is to go back now and look for those teeny little areas that had highlights that you might not have seen at first, because it's the last 5% of what you do that's going to make or break the drawing in terms of whether you're happy with it or not. It's looking for the little details. For example, there's a little line that goes around that edge, and there's an outline right here. It's interesting when you start looking for outlines where you'll find them. Following this along, and there's a little bit more highlight here. So this fold here actually follows itself pretty far down. And then I noticed there's a little bit of a brighter red here, so I'm going back with that orange up here on the top and right in here as well. So if I were finished and not using the water, this is pretty much where we are. Notice we're getting bends by drawing the shadows, highlights, and by not connecting these lines straight. If material bends, go with the flow and draw it accordingly. But let's see what happens with this when I add some water. As we're aware, a little bit of water with these colored pencils goes a long way. But if I just start adding the water in here, we can see just how rich and beautiful we can get these areas. But you have to be careful with the brush, because as you can see there, it sort of got a little out of hand. So this is getting a little too wet. And again, if this is not your thing, you're like, well, I'm not trying to learn how to paint, I wanted to learn how to draw, that's fine too. I think it worked just fine as a drawing, but I am just so enamored with watching the magic of this pigment with the water added that it's just always fun. And what I'm going to do is draw back over this then with regular colored pencil. So I'm really just creating a smoother surface for myself. And I'm just doing the red for right now, as I'm going to change water before I go to the white, or we're going to wind up with a big pink area, which is not what we want at all. And you can see we're losing a little bit of that highlight. So I'm going to go back in and draw some of my lighter orange reds over top of this. But it's just a lot of fun. And I am drawing. As you can see, I'm manipulating the brush like I would if I was drawing with an ink pen. So you see I can draw the outline and then go back in and fill in the rest of this. These pencils are just really forgiving as far as the water goes. You just have to be judicious about cleaning your brush. And I think right here where I don't like that, just gonna dab out what I can just to make that lighter, because I'm gonna go over that with white pencil later. So let's see if we have a clean brush. I know the water's not completely clean, but it's clean enough to go in with the blue. And then I'm just gonna lightly go around here. And you notice I don't have a fancy brush. This is truly a little cheap paintbrush. Probably came in one of my grandkids' pen sets, and don't tell them I'm using it, but I'm just gonna go around it. Now I don't think I'm gonna fill in the stars with water. I'm going to just color them in again heavier with colored pencil, but it might start to get mucky, and I don't want that effect. I want to keep the integrity of the fabric pretty close, but where it's blue, I'm going to go ahead and go into it down in here. I saved this part where it was a bluish kind of purple transition tone for last on purpose, so I wouldn't have to worry about that. Then again, if I check on my paper towel and my brush, even though that water's a little tinted, the brush is clear, I can go back in and lightly get this white smoothed in. Now I'm hardly using any water on the white because the white pigment is very fragile. It doesn't take much for it to blend at all because it works as a blender in and of itself. So I'm just loosely going in, a little bit of water, very little bit of water, and just kind of softly navigating along, being careful not to get up into that red if you're doing water, like right there, but I want to make that red brighter so that works. Just be cognizant of the fact that if you go brighter with the red, then clean out your brush before you go back to the last of your whites. And I'm just, again, roughing in the white ever so carefully here along my edges, kind of come down a little bit and come around here. I'm using the water in the white more as a blender to just kind of soften some of my shadows in a little bit, but I'm not trying to overdo it. Just make sure you get everywhere you want to get. Then we're going to let this dry a minute and come back and do our final pass with regular color pencil. So I've given this a chance to dry, and now we're just going to go back in and rework where there might be some highlights that got lost. So I'm taking that orange and brightening up some of my reds where I feel like it might have just muddled together a little too much. But I'm not going to re-wet this. So whatever I do now, this is going to be it, because I do like the idea of the dry medium being our primary influence on what we're doing. And this is where I think it starts to unify it a bit as a drawing, lest anyone get confused that it's a pencil. And I can also go back in and correct areas that may have bled into the others a little bit. For example, I can go over some of the reds with the white, unify that in, and then where things aren't even dark enough, I can go back in and get them darker again by laying in this darker red or going back in with the green and the dark red as need be. For example, here. So there's a multitude of ways that you can do corrections if you find like, holy smokes, I really need to change where things were going here. It's not a problem. That's the beauty of doing this kind of a drawing where we're doing it in stages and layers, because you can go back in and fix things. Like this shadow here, I don't feel is near dark enough. So I'm using my green to really give that emphasis. And the same thing up here. I think when we were doing the water, I probably lost little areas of this. And then I can go back in and just add these little tiny dips of shadow that are going to make a huge difference when we're finished here. Like just getting a little more depth on the drawing, maybe a little more down in here. And then of course, going back over that green with the red, that's kind of key to get this thing blended in a little bit better. But I would say we're about 98% done. I just want to touch up those stars a bit, and then we'll take the tape off and kind of see where we are. Fix this little ridge here. There we go there, making sure I got where I just did my last bit of greens. I don't want the flag to look like it's green. I'm just trying to give it a darker version of itself. And right here, a little more green shadow. Hopefully you're also seeing how I'm turning my paper. It's fine to turn things around. You don't just have to commit to one direction and then stick to it. Whichever way is most comfortable for your hand is fine. All right, so these stars, we can see that they're blue because when you look at the final example again, they used blue to show the shading of the stars, but I'm just gonna go over this with a little more white just to press in because we did not wet the stars. Sometimes detail work is not where you wanna go when you're adding white and water because the two of them might not necessarily work great. And then I'm just gonna add a little more pressure here on the whites where I see them bumping up and around, kind of blend in a little bit more of these highlights and folds in the white part. Here I see that this is whiter, so I can just color it back in again, get it a little brighter here too. I'm moving my paper around a bit, which is fine. Then I notice here, this blends in. Then it's super white right up here again. Okay, blend that in, there. And there. There's always one more spot. It never fails. And right there. All right. I think we've got a wavy flag. So here's my wavy colored pencil flag. As you can see, there's a lot of distortion going on in this picture. I'll hold it up this way so you can see. We have our highlights, our shadows, but this is all done by the beauty of colored pencil, adding a little bit of water and then going back over it with regular colored pencil and not using any other medium over top of that, like no other marker or anything like that. You want to keep it close to whatever the intent was, and the intent for this was colored pencil. So let's remove that masking tape and see our final result. Well, here it is. I'm pretty happy with the result. It's a lot of fun to try these full frame drawings. And since we were talking about it being Veterans Day, I thought you might try something patriotic. Now, if you don't want to make a full drawing of a flag, then by all means, just consider adding a flag to something else, a landscape, a cityscape, a still life. Maybe you have artifacts, paraphernalia that you've collected from trips overseas that might represent your service to the country. And maybe an American flag can be incorporated somehow in an environmental still life of that caliber. Whatever is interesting for you. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Anyone Can Draw, Paint, and Create. For those of you who have dedicated your lives and sacrifice to serve our country, thank you very much for that service, and we honor you every day, but especially today on Veterans Day. Till next week, Vincent Hall, stay safe and be well, and I'll see you down in the Art Center or virtually on another episode of Anyone Can Draw, Paint, and Create.